Let's talk about Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I did a little bit of research on this novel because at first I really didn't like it, and it's definitely not a book that I'm gonna pick up again. Like, Victorian style novels just aren't really my thing, but I did a little bit of research on Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice, and I feel like I have a bit of a better understanding of why it's a classic. I think a lot about things like The Bachelorette and reality TV shows. The other day, my husband came downstairs. I was folding laundry and he said, "Why are you watching Vampire Diaries?" And I was like, I'm a girl. I'm allowed to. And I think that this novel is exactly that. And I'm not saying that it's like a reality TV show, but it was for entertainment purposes. People read this book to kind of escape, and there's a lot of emotions. It's more of, I would say, like a emotionally driven book, less of a plot driven book. So it's very gossipy in certain elements, but you have to think back then when it was written, this was the reality TV show and people came to this to escape, versus now I don't really feel the need to read a book like this because I want something with a hard-hitting message, because I'm constantly bombarded with entertainment on my TV, on my phone, everywhere. You know, I'm constantly getting entertained. So the fact that this book was kind of meant for entertainment, it doesn't really suit my preference. But with that being said, it does have a message that I didn't really pay attention to the first time I read it through. So the book was published in the late 1700s, and it kind of takes place in the early 1800s. And I didn't know, but Jane Austen actually didn't even have her name on this book when she published it. She published it by a lady, because back in the day, it was kind of frowned upon for women to write books and stuff. This book really paved the way for modern day feminism in some ways. To give you a little bit of context on the story, the main character is this girl named Elizabeth, and she's basically looking for a suitor. So she meets all these men and she gets proposed to by this guy named Colin. So she turns him down. A few days later, he ended up proposing to one of her friends, and her friend said yes because she felt like she had no other option and that he was the best she was ever gonna get. So back in the day, you never said no to a man who proposed, because that could ruin your chances of marriage. It could ruin your reputation. So Elizabeth had said no to that guy, and then another guy named Mr. Darcy comes around and he asks for her proposal, marriage, and she says no again, which is unheard of at the time. You shouldn't be allowed to say no. So this book was kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit, and then Elizabeth ends up realizing that she kind of misjudged Mr. Darcy, and then she ends up saying yes to his proposal when he proposed to her a second time. So there's a lot of like back and forth and stuff, but it was basically a book that was showing us that women are allowed to say no and are allowed to make their own decisions. So this book definitely has some weight to it. Just because it's not a kind of novel that I necessarily enjoy reading, I do appreciate that it is a classic. So I did want to share my insights about it in that way. Other than that, the language of the novel isn't really something that I enjoy reading, that Victorian style novel. I read A Tale of Two Cities, and that was probably another one of my criticisms. It's just difficult to read. It's difficult to get into it because that's not the time period that we're living in now, and they're just so prim and proper. But I believe I ended up ranking the book a C on my tier or something like that, something really low. But I'm not going to change my ranking on it because I don't necessarily enjoy this kind of novel, but I do appreciate it. The next book that I'm going to be talking more about is called The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, so make sure that you stick around if you want to know the core elements of this novel, what I liked and what I didn't like. Thanks for watching.